Now, I would like to request Ms. Sujata Das, co-founder, SGI's Technologies, to introduce our today's chief guest, Mr. Rituraj Phukan.
Yeah, thank you, Mansa, for giving me this opportunity to address our chief guest of this event. And good morning, everyone. So now, please join me in welcoming our chief guest, that is our Mr. Rituraj Phukan. So, Mr. Rituraj Phukan is an environmental writer, adventurer, and naturalist based out of Assam. As the National Coordinator for Biodiversity for the Climate Reality Project India, Chief Operating Officer for Work for Water, and Secretary General of Green Guard Nature Organization, he facilitates awareness and action on the three Ws, that is warming, water, and wildlife, working with all stakeholders including indigenous communities, students, civil society, business, and media for a positive societal impact. He is driven by concerns over glacial loss in the water towers of Asia and is currently working on an initiative to mobilize civil society action in the countries of the Himalayan region. Mr. Rituraj was personally trained as a climate reality leader by Nobel laureate. He authored the chapter Biodiversity in a Warming World in the Amazon #1 bestseller Climate Abundant, a book launched in the USA on Earth Day 2019. Mr. Rituraj has personally experienced the impacts of climate change in Antarctica and across the Arctic region. He has delivered presentations and talks across various countries worldwide. He is a member of the International Union for Conservation of Nature and sits on the board of civil society groups in the Americas, Europe, and Australia. Now, without further ado, we would like to turn time over to Mr. Rituraj Phukan. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much. Am I able to share my screen?
Yes, sir, yes.
Just let me know if it is visible.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay, so it's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, along with a screenshot of the article that was published today. That was really quick, and I would like to thank at the very beginning all the leadership of ACE GIS Technologies, all the sponsors, dignitaries, and all the guests who are here and for having me here. And I will uh, start by wishing you all a very happy World Environment Day 2021. And my topic today is biodiversity and wildlife restoration. And yes, we have already heard this been spoken about, reimagine, recreate, restore. This is what we are at. I mean, for too long, I think we have taken nature for granted. We have destroyed the natural spaces around us, and now we are at a point when it threatens the very existence of life on Earth as we know it. And the even ecosystem restoration actually represent for a lot of us the last 10 years in which we must take decisive action to ensure that we avoid catastrophic collapse of biodiversity, catastrophic climate change, as well as a lot of existential threats to humanity. So what were we doing all these years? Some of you might ask, didn't you realize that biodiversity was being lost? Well, the United Nations decade for biodiversity actually ended last year. And the 10 years, we moved ahead to find harmony with nature. And we had something called the HE Biodiversity Targets. And when we had a review last year, none of these targets were actually fully met. So these 20 targets remained as it were. And so now we have a post-2020 global biodiversity framework that has yet to be ratified. The conference was supposed to be held at Kunming in China, but because of COVID-19, ironically, which is, I believe, a consequence of our exploitation of nature, and this has been postponed to this year. So in October this year, we might have this treaty ratified. So we'll have a proper framework, and all the students here for the next 10 years will be working under this framework, and you'll be hearing a lot of things like restoration, rewilding, and of course, the Earth Day, we had the theme of restore our Earth, and now we have this ecosystem restoration. So this is World Environment Day. You might have read about this already. So yes, we are not only talking about the living organisms, but also the human created surroundings like systems like cities and farms. So all of it totally makes the ecosystem. And this is basically, we are losing and destroying the foundations of our survival at an alarming rate. I've already talked about why we have 10 more years. I think we will quickly touch on the IPCC 1.5-degree report that was published a couple of years back, where we had 12 years to take decisive action on climate change. And then we had the Convention on Biological Diversity giving us 10 years to stop the catastrophic loss of biodiversity. Now, these three crises, the planetary crises, we call them, of biodiversity, of pollution, and of biodiversity, and of climate change. So these three are interconnected, interrelated. So we now realize that when we talk about human health, we cannot, you know, ignore the health of the ecosystems around us, the health of the planet. So it is all interconnected, and now we are realizing it. And now that we all need to work together to ensure that the, 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 the catastrophic slide to tipping points, global tipping points where there is no coming back, are averted somehow. So I'm going to quickly look at some of the reports. This is, of course, a Living Planet report from last year. How much we have destroyed, 2/3 decline in global populations of all mammals and birds and amphibians and reptiles and fishes in less than 50 years. So this is really shocking. We are adding more and more species to the red data lists now, and even all those river dolphins, who would have thought all 31 species of them are now placed on the extinction threatened list. Now let's go to my favorite animal, the polar bear. The top right picture, the big fat polar bear that was taken by me in the Canadian Arctic about 6 years back. And this is how polar bears should look like. You know, they should be well fattened up during the summer, and then ready to hunt across throughout the winter when the sea ice freezes, and then the baby seals come up through those holes. But because the ice is freezing late across the Arctic, and also melting faster, especially in habitats like the Hudson Bay area, the polar bears are forced to scavenge in townships, like this picture on the left top from the Yamal Peninsula, where a lot of polar bears can be seen in the scavenging on the litter there. And the bottom right picture, of course, is what the Arctic now increasingly looks like. It is covered with a black layer of soot, which decreases the albedo and then adds to the positive feedback on climate change. And of course, the polar bears are very vital to the entire Arctic ecosystem. Just for example, you can see the tiny little Arctic fox following the polar bear. Their lives are actually dependent on the polar bear, because they'll eat the leftovers of what this bears hunt. During the week that I was there in June 2019, I was in the North Polar region in Svalbard, and I learned something new. About 200 of the Svalbard reindeer died during the week I had reached, and I learned that this was because it was raining in the Arctic rather than snowing. So these animals are adapted to digging through the soft snow to reach the grass or the vegetation that they eat there. And when it rains, it freezes and becomes hard ice, and they are unable to dig through. And it is really sad that not only are they losing their lives to starvation, but also the sizes are shrinking because of the decrease in available fodder. There are other challenges to the survival of animals in the Arctic. One, of course, is the increasing number of pests like mosquitoes and black flies, which are uh, proliferating as temperatures warm. So this entire ecosystem is now changing, and that's happening in even in a remote area like the Arctic. Uh, and back in 2015, I was at the Churchill Northern Studies Center, and we are looking at how different aspects of warming uh, is affecting the ecosystem. So we did some, this is a mesocosm on how the nutrient contents in various wetlands across the Arctic are being affected by subtle changes in temperature, and how it affects microorganisms like copepods and also survival of the two species of frogs, this boreal chorus frog with the American wood frog, and three species of skittlefish, which actually survived the 8-month-long freezing of these wetlands in this area. Uh, so this is ongoing research, and there were, of course, many more. Now we must remember these frogs, these amphibians have survived on this planet much, much longer than us. They were here even before the dinosaurs. So now, if 50% of these amphibians are uh, on the verge of extinction or on the road to extinction, then that says a lot about the health of the planet. Now, why is this happening? Why is this ecosystem changes affecting biodiversity? Because all living things survive in conditions, the bioclimatic envelope must be just right. Just like life on Earth exists because the conditions are just right, not too cold, not too hot. Uh, Similarly, all these animals, they have evolved to survive in some particular parameters, and if that changes, they tend to follow their bioclimatic envelope and find areas where they can possibly live and breed and find food. But that is always not possible. In even in Antarctica, in the coldest regions, I found out this colony of emperor penguins were actually migrating further and further south from the Geology archipelago, where the movie The March of the Penguins was shot some years back, some decades back. So the world is changing everywhere. In the southern hemisphere, we have this the purple sea urchin, the zooplanktons, whale sharks, all have been documented to be moving, migrating en masse towards the South Pole, away from the equator. And these are all, of course, marine species. And in the northern hemisphere, the blue Argus butterfly, Pika, and the Satis warbler, these are all terrestrial species. These are all migrating slowly towards the polar regions, away from the equator. So all this large scale migration is taking place, and this is a big ecosystem effect. And there's something we are increasingly seeing, that is live fast, die small. There is increased metabolism, increased respiration and reproduction rate, and that means that animals they grow up faster, so their sizes are smaller, they reach their reproductive age much faster, and these all these effects, they are so much interrelated. These are creating all those ecosystem effects that we talk about. So it is not very easy when you talk about ecosystem restoration to just turn back the clock, because these things are already happening. I don't want to go into detail, but if you want to read more, just take a screenshot or something, and then uh, you can Google and follow up with this research. But this is very interesting, and am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my screen just froze, so I'm just trying to set this right. Just let me see what's happening. This is not moving; it's like frozen. Okay, I just stopped the sharing. I'm going to share again.
Sure, sir.
Yeah, technology sometimes gets, especially have this bad weather and very difficult power conditions in Assam right now. Okay, are we back to where we stopped?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Right. No, sorry for the disruption. And so some of this ecosystem effects on wildlife is incredible. You know, we just found out a few years back that percentage of females in sea turtles are increasing exponentially. 99% of newborns are now females. So you know what that means for the future of the species. Uh, Generally, species which can survive anywhere in different type of ecosystems are getting, are being favored by evolution rather than species which are more adapted to specific ecosystems. For example, the red fox, it can survive in many types of uh, ecosystems from the Himalayas to the Arctic. Now they are getting into the Arctic, whereas the Arctic fox only survives in this extreme Arctic cold ecosystems. Right now that the bigger, larger red fox is moving into the area of the Arctic fox, they are in fact competing for the same food sources, which are already very scarce in the Arctic, and then they're also predating on the smaller species. So these are creating a lot of changes that we are still learning about. And of course, a lot of populations of these large animals are dying out due to this cascading effects. One of the main concerns, of course, in terms of biodiversity is the state of coral reefs around the world. A few years back, the Great Barrier Reef was almost wiped out. Thankfully, it is recovering now, but not all parts. Some of it is still being affected by what happened for continuously in the 4 years. And you know, we never recorded such kind of coral bleaching events before 1998. So now it is happening almost every year. Even in Lakshadweep, we have seen this happening. Coral reefs are totally been affected by bleaching, and then they die out. And the bleaching affects when the algae that lives on this corals called zooxanthellae is expelled because of increasing temperatures, and then they lose their color and then they slowly die. Uh, Ocean acidification is another big impact that everybody is talking about, and 30% more acidic, and that is already affecting the animals like this snails, which needs which are unable to form the shells. And perhaps the most pressing effect in the oceans is deoxygenation. And then we are seeing deoxygenation happening not only in areas close to the coast, but also in the open seas. Uh, of course, it affects a lot because these areas are basically dead zones. So without oxygen, there is no life. So all these coastal communities which depend on fishing and all the entire coastal ecosystems are being affected by these dead zones. Uh, Again, another very important aspect that we used to overlook in the past is bees. You know, but there are so many species of bees. They are very vital for our food security because about 40% of vegetables and fruits depend on pollinators like bees. So without them, we are going to lose out. And it is disrupting the warming is disrupting the synchronization between flowers blooming and then at the time which the bees come and pollinate them. So all these changes are taking place across the ecosystem, and the loss of insects, in fact, is being termed as a collapse of nature, and that is one of the this study was one of the reasons why now we have so much of emphasis on this ecosystem restoration. Now let's come to our region for a while. The Hindu Coast Himalaya assessment, which was published in January 2019, uh, recorded large changes across the Himalayan mountains with vegetation change, disappearance of grasslands, the meadows, wetlands, and all these habitats that are changing. And basically, the entire ecosystem is slowly changing, and that uh, This is one of the most biodiverse region in the entire world. New species been discovered, especially the eastern Himalaya where we live. Uh, you can see how important this is. It's not just important from the point of view of species, but uh, nearly 2 billion people are dependent on the water from the Asian water towers, as we call them. And all these biodiversity hotspots are dependent on the Himalayan waters, just like all of us humans do. So this is one area of concern, and especially in the northeast, where we are set to lose about 95% of the glaciers if warming continues like it is now. But if we are to restrict it to 1.5 degrees Celsius, like the Paris Agreement wants us to, we will still lose 64% of the glaciers. So in the long term, that would mean lot of uh, it would mean water scarcity, ecosystem changes, and a lot of other things, which is now we cannot even think of in a water abundant area. But in the short term, of course, we will have more floods. Uh, it will also affect the biodiversity. And remember here, people of the Northeast are totally, especially the indigenous communities, are totally connected with the biodiversity. Their lives and cultures are intertwined with the biodiversity around them. And if we lose the biodiversity, we are talking about losing a lot of these cultural aspects. We are talking about a lot of this traits that make this region unique will disappear. So this is a concern. We are going to look at some of the iconic species in this region and how they have been affected by climate change. Now, there is one projected disruption of the monsoons, and the grasslands depend the regeneration of the grassland habitats across the floodplains depend on the rains. So if we do have changes, then it will affect animals like the rhinos. In fact, in Nepal, one study says that grasslands are uh, shifting further south. So they worried about losing all the rhinos to India. The similar case with elephants. Elephants, of course, are very vulnerable to climate change because of they suffer from heat stress. They need voluminous amounts of water and food. And then we have recorded myself working in the field that vegetation changes is happening. So grasslands are being overrun by invasive species. So like very recently, we had 18 elephants which were killed by lightning at this point of time. That is what we know. But this is the same area where my organization, Green Gardeners Organization, we have recorded over uh, 20 deaths in the last 15, 16 years, which can be attributed to intentional electrocution as well as poisoning. So there is a lot of conflict, and we are trying to facilitate coexistence, but we have succeeded in many areas, but still there are some parts where this has worsened. But you also cannot really help empathizing with the people, because sometimes they lose everything that they have grown and they depend so much on the paddy that they have grown, and they have to starve. So this ecosystem change has to be addressed so that these animals have enough to eat up in the hills. Now let's come to our national animal, the tiger. Tigers are suffering in different ways. In some areas, the forest habitat is changing. Now remember that sometimes the grasslands disappear. The deer would follow uh, the grassland and they will migrate to another area of the park where this grass is still available. But big cats like the tigers, being territorial, they cannot follow the prey, and that causes big problems because the territorial animals will fight unto death. There are other effects like the Sundarbans habitat could be lost because of sea level rise. And in some places like Bhutan and Arunachal, of course, tigers are migrating up the hills, and that is going to cause big problems for the snow leopard because they will compete with them for the same food, mountain goats like Himalayan tar. Uh, to learn more about this biodiversity impacts of warming, you could look at this book, which is the #1 bestseller that was mentioned during my introduction. Uh, I wrote the biodiversity impacts chapter in this, and on the right, of course, is the person under whose leadership I went on two of my expeditions to the polar regions. Robert Swan, and he's the first man to have walked to both the poles. Now, the global biodiversity outlook actually listed what we need to do to stop this loss of catastrophic loss of biodiversity. And in fact, intact ecosystems or restoring ecosystems is one of them. Agricultural transition, food system transition is another, and understanding that we need to follow a one health system is perhaps the most important. The health of the planet, the health of biodiversity, the health of ecosystems, and human health, these are all interconnected. That's the underlying message. And we are also talking about rewilding now, wildlife restoration, basically. That is what is rewilding. You have heard probably that India is going to reintroduce cheetah back in the country after a long time. And in fact, in Assam, we have had some kind of rewilding going on for a long time, with rhino being relocated into Manas from areas of abundance like Arjuna. So what we must do, we must revive our oceans. It is we have to bring back the whales to their perhaps up to the historic population numbers, so that we can revive our oceans. We have to restore the seagrass beds in the ocean. This is already happening. In fact, by the way, there's a big project going on in the UK where seagrass is being regrown. So this is restoration in progress. We must restore grasslands and savannas. Now, grasslands are perhaps one of the most exploited, because this is where we started agriculture, and this is also very important for species like our own rhino and elephant, of course. We must restore rivers and wetlands because they are so vital for our own survival, and these cleanups that people are doing now all over the country, even here in Assam and across India, these are so important. We must realize that dumping plastic in this wetlands is very detrimental to human health. In fact, plastics have reached the most uninhabited parts of this world, including the polar regions. Cropland, we must lock the carbon in peatlands. This is so important because across the Arctic, the peatlands have been drying up. And then because they are dry, they are very prone to fire. And you must have read about this Arctic peatland fires in the last 3 years or 4 years. So this will again add up to the not only the ecosystem destruction, but to the warming of the planet. So that's a positive feedback. We have already talked a bit about mountains. They're so important for not just wildlife, but also for water supply. Almost half of humanity depends on mountains, especially in the Asian watchtowers, the Himalayas. Now, farmlands is something we do not think of when we talk about ecosystem restoration, yes, but yeah, farmlands help a lot of animals survive. We can bring back many animals from extinction, from the threat of extinction, because we live around these farmlands. Then forests, yes, can we bring back forests? Of course, so we have to stop destroying them first, and then we can definitely regrow this forest. In fact, we have something called 30 by 30, where we have a target of protecting 30% of land areas and 30% of marine areas by 2030, and that will include bringing back, restoring a lot of this forest. Greening our cities is again picking up. Urban biodiversity depends on these green spots, and activists around the world are fighting to create and restore degraded green spaces in their respective cities. And all of you, I'm sure, would love to do that. Now, rewilding, restoration, and the power of one. I'd just like to finish my presentation now with somebody who inspires me all the time, Mr. Chalapang, the forest man of India. He has shown for the last 40 years what the world is now talking about. So, all respect to him. If anybody does not know him or know about him, please Google and look up. I'm sure all of you do. But it is always so important to keep going back to what he has done, what he says, and how he continues to inspire generations of people all around the world. So I will end with this slide. Uh, Now, a lot of us think that we are going to save the planet. It is not true. We are only going to save ourselves, our species, the human species. The planet will take care of itself. But whether we survive as a species depends on us. Thank you very much. So I will stop sharing here. I hope I was audible, and we
Yes,
have some
sir.
technology problems. I know that.
No problem, sir. Thank you so much for enlightening us and giving us wonderful insights about ecosystem restoration. We have some questions coming up. Would you like to address them, sir?
Oh yes, yeah, we can actually
Okay.
get some.
May I request Rajashri to check the questions for Mr. Rituraj Phukan if there are any in the Zoom panel?
Yes, thank you, Mansa, for giving me this opportunity. So I will ask you questions on behalf of iPad. He is asking that if any possibility that wildlife ecosystem lose and other instinct species in the region could be possibly rescued. So do you have any experience program that's similar in our country, Philippine experiences? Sir.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the questions. Let me have a look in the chat. Is this in the chat box?
So, sir, yes, sir.
Okay, can you repeat, please? I cannot find it. So please
Yes,
repeat the
sir.
question
So,
if you
sir,
don't mind.
yes, sir. So he is asking that if any possibility that wildlife ecosystem lose and other instinct species in the region could be possibly rescued. So do you have any experience program that's similar in our country, Philippine experiences?
Well, first of all, Assam has been implementing a kind of rewilding or restoration program for a long time. Uh, for example, I would say if you look at the Manas National Park, where we lost all the rhinos due to insurgency problems, but then it also meant a lot of trees were cut and a lot of the ecosystem services uh, were not there. So the government made a lot of efforts to actually, along with a lot of international NGOs, they made a lot of effort to restore the habitat and made it possible to relocate rhinos from Povitra and Kaziranga to Manas. And they are now surviving. We have a viable population in Manas. So I think that's a successful model. And there are other places like other degraded habitats which have been restored in the country. And now the government has declared its intention to bring back a cheetah. And obviously, before that, years of effort has gone into making the habitat suitable. So restoring the habitat to what is required for survival of the cheetah in nature has already been looked into. I think these are examples that we already have in the country. But if you want to look at, okay, you asked about India specifically. So yeah, I think that's fine.
Thank you. Sir, the second question is asked by Pawan Muddu. The question is, sir, what is happening in the Arctic biodiversity is due to climatic change or climate variability? As due to polar vortex, what we are seeing is rare climatic phenomena.
Well, climate variability happens. Yeah, it is expected, and it does happen across across millennia. I would say a long time. But what we have experienced in the polar region, especially the North Polar region across the Arctic in the past few years, uh, especially in the past 5 years, is unprecedented. Such rapid warming has not happened. When I landed at the Longyearbyen, which is the world's northernmost town, in June 2019, I was surprised to find that a new report was published where it talked about how the area had warmed by 5 degrees Celsius in the last 20 years. So that is very rapid in geological terms. You know, if a place becomes hotter by 5 degrees Celsius within such a short span of time, this is going to affect everything. We are fine. We can run under the fan or, switch on the air conditioner. But for wildlife, it is a survival existential threat. So this rapid changes it's not due to climate variability. It is due to anthropogenic climate change, due to our human activities, due to the emission of greenhouse gases, plus the Arctic positive feedback loop that we are seeing, the loss of albedo. All of these have combined and to create conditions which make it very difficult for the uh, the biodiversity to survive there. And it is not just polar bears; it is also other animals like the belugas uh, and the bow-headed whales, which are now facing the threat of orcas coming into the Arctic because some parts are not frozen anymore. So in the past, the orcas were prevented by the frozen seas, but now they are seen to be moving upwards. The walrus is again being affected by loss of the ice in many areas. So all this Arctic biodiversity, in fact, are losing out. And then of course there is I had already talked about the increased instances of black flies and mosquitoes in the Arctic, and because of that, it is creating a survival threat to species like the musk ox, the the, the reindeer. All of these, the babies somehow get swamped by these blood-sucking insects, and many of them actually die. So these are happening quite due to the rapid increase in temperature rather than any climate barrier release.
Thank you. Sir, the next question is asked by Ankit Sharma. So the question is, sir, does genetic engineering pose any risk to genetic diversity?
Well, this is not my area, but you are talking about, I don't know if you wanted to ask about geoengineering or are you talking about genetic engineering? Because uh, if you talk about geoengineering, I could probably give some insights, but really not my area here, the genetic engineering.
No issues, sir. So the next question is from Silpa Narayanan. So sir, she wants to know that the role of GIS in estimating GHG emissions or in predicting climate change.
Yes, I think that's a very good question. And at the beginning of this program, I was very interested in seeing how technology is being used to map out different conditions. And somebody was presenting about some tools that they have developed. And I believe the GIS also could be very useful in localizing, sources of emissions in various landscapes, maybe in the northeast India. So we can actually know like which wetland is degraded by looking at what has been emitted in that particular landscape. So I think these are very possible, but maybe it could have more impact if it's done over a wider area.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, I will end up with these questions only. Thank you so much, sir.